Hello, sword people. Welcome to the Sword Guy podcast. This is your host, Dr. Guy Windsor, consulting swordsman, teacher, and writer. Join me for interviews with historical martial arts instructors and experts from a wide range of related disciplines as we discuss swords, history, training, and bringing the joy of historical martial arts into our modern lives. I hope you enjoy this greatest hit episode of the show. You can find all the episodes at swordschool.com/podcast, and there's a direct link in the description to this episode's show notes. On with the show. I'm here today with Roland Warzecha, who is known online as Dimikator. He's well known for his sword and buckler research, his research into the Viking sword and shield materials, and he is most commonly found online at patreon.com/Dimikator, Dimikator. So, without further ado, Roland, welcome to the show.
Guy, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's nice to see you. Now, just to start off, could you locate us? Whereabouts in the world are you?
Well, I'm living in a rural place, maybe an hour's drive out of Hamburg, and this is in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, which was behind the Iron Curtain for a long time, but now, of course, as you know, it's not anymore, and so I'm living out here in the countryside.
Lovely, and I've actually been to your house, and it is gorgeous.
Yeah, it was great having you. Yeah, and you came at a really good time in the year. So it was summer, and we were sitting outside talking swords.
Absolutely, as we shall do this morning. Okay, so Roland, what made you want to start historical martial arts, and how did you actually get started?
Okay, so before I even knew what martial arts was, I had to make a decision whether I wanted to become Tarzan or Prince Valiant.
Okay, and that's an important decision to make.
That's an absolutely important decision, which I had to make at age 6 or so.
Yeah.
And then I went for Prince Valiant. I don't know if it has to do anything with the length of the blade that he was carrying around. I have no idea. But Prince Valiant was really, really cool. So he was the reason why I went to the local library on a regular basis, because they had these comic books, those fantastic Hal Foster comic books. And whenever I had finished one, I would go there and pick up the next volume.
Okay,
so that's how I got interested. Yeah, so that's how I got interested in swords. And as you well know, Prince Valiant is supposed to be a Viking prince. And so I got interested in the Vikings, and that never really stopped. Of course, I would have a passing interest in Star Wars. I know you are a Star Wars addict, or Star Trek, but I always came back to the swords, the real swords, the steel swords. And then in the 1990s, I passed by a showcase in a street, like the ones where they would hang up movie posters or stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
But there weren't any posters, there were swords in there. And I thought, oh my God, yeah, really, there were swords.
Where is this shop? I want to go.
I don't even know if it exists anymore. But as I said, I was a student at Art Academy in southern Germany. And ever since my childhood, I had this dream of dressing up in proper kit, not just fake stuff, but the real thing, and running about with swords and ideally with like-minded people. And via this showcase, because of course I would go to this shop, and turned out it was just 2 streets from where I was living, so it was the same part of town. It was actually an old villa, and there was this guy living there. I think that house belonged to his old mother, and the whole place was stuffed with halberds and shields and swords. Yeah, absolutely. So it was a private home. It wasn't a regular shop. And I went in there, and I thought, like, oh, wow. And that was the first time that I found out about reenactment and living history. I had no idea anything like that existed, and in the 90s, there was hardly anything like that going on in Germany. Yeah, so that's where I got my first steel weapon, which, in fact, was a spearhead. It was not a sword. Okay. Because I have always been a perfectionist, and there was nothing that was so appealing to me that I said, this is my sword.
Okay.
So I did order one sword to be custom made for me at that point. And and I picked up this spear. And that's how it all started. I got involved in reenactment, and then as you know, in reenactment, they have this eclectic sports system where they do competitive battles.
Sure.
But it's like tippy-tappy, you're dead, and there's restricted
Yeah, they're putting on a safe display for the crowd.
Absolutely.
Rather than practicing a
exactly.
martial art.
Like the SCA in America, they had to make a decision: how can we actually compromise the martial art, or rather reduce the risk for the participants? And so they went for those rattan sticks.
Sure.
And then in Europe, it was steel, blunt steel, of course. But restricted target areas, and so that's what I did for a couple of years, and it was wild fun. But it dawned on me pretty quickly that it's kind of strange if you don't thrust somebody in the face, and if it's prohibited to cut to the hands.
Okay, how many podcasts are there where you could just say that? Like, it's just weird not to be able to stab people in the face. I mean, come on.
That's
but
right.
Yes. You are amongst
Absolutely.
friends. Speak freely.
Yeah, okay. That would actually be a really good commercial. Like, if you want to advertise for your podcast, how many podcasts are there? Anyway, so because I started doing research ever since I was a kid, because I collected all the books that you could get about the Vikings, about swords, and mind you, I've never been a knightly guy, so I was never really interested in armor and sitting on a horse and riding against my enemy with a lance. It was always sword and shield and on the ground. That's my kind of thing. And so I realized those reenactment swords were actually incorrect in terms of proportions. Like the hilt was extremely long while the blade was quite short, and then the fullers, of course, were pretty wide. And so I wondered, why is it? Also, if you looked at your protective gloves, and these are unauthentic to begin with, they always rub through at the same spot, which is that the heel of the hand? This part here, the hand, just above the wrist. Right. That's where your gloves would always rub through. And I will come back to that later when we talk about sword ergonomics and the design of sword hilts, because as it says in one of the treatises, there is nothing about the sword that is arbitrary. Each single part of the sword has its meaning, and you have to accept that, and you have to use the sword according to its design. So I will come back to that later. But anyway, it dawned on me that this is just a sport, and while it's wild fun, running through the woods and hitting each other, and it's also something where you need a lot of training for, because you do need the control. And then if you are in mass skirmishes with up to 1,000 people or so, then you would know how to move as a sole.
As a unit?
As a unit, exactly. And so it does need a lot of training, but I really wanted to know, how did they actually use these swords? And then in 2000, that's when I started my basic martial arts education. I was, as the Americans would call it, a Ren Fair event, some reenactment near Hamburg. I was visiting some friends, and we would do some training behind their tents, so that was not official part of the show. And more and more people would come and take a look, because they thought it was more attractive than the fight shows that were set up for the audiences. And then there were two guys which looked like they stepped right out of some Avengers movie or so, like really, really tall and wide chests. And one of them stepped up to me and said, like, "Well, you're not really killing each other, right? You never hit the head." I said, No, we must not hit the head, because that's because of safety. And but we do tap the shoulder, and that's supposed to simulate a thrust into the neck. And we train that like twice per week. And so what do you do? Well, I have a martial arts school, and I train every day, and I work as security personnel in the red light district at weekends. Come over to our place, and we show you how to fight correctly.
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Oh, yeah,
awesome.
Cool, awesome." Yeah. And so, and then one of them picked up one of the swords and moved it like some eskrima stick, like did some really cool stunts. And I thought, "Oh, awesome! I want to learn that." So I did go to their place, and they were really surprised. They said, "You're the first sword person ever to actually come. We've talked to so many pretend knights, and they said, yeah, sure, awesome, but nobody would ever come. I said, no, I really want to learn how to fight properly. And so that was great, and I still owe them big time because they introduced me to principles. So the one thing which I really loved about their place instantly was they said, so whatever we're going to teach you, all the technique, is only so that you understand the underlying principles. Mm-hmm. It's not about the technique, so it's not a collection of tricks. It's the principles that make our fighting work, and this is what we're going to teach. And this is something that put me into a position to address medieval fencing manuscripts, combat manuscripts in a different manner, or in an appropriate manner later on. So so that's how I learned. That's how I got my basic martial arts education.
So was that a screamer?
It's a screamer based. It was like a mishmash. They had done a lot of. They had done Wing Chun, Kung Fu, and kickboxing competition stuff, and of course they were working on the street as a bouncer every single weekend, and so
that's a really good reality check.
Exactly. At least for what they what they are doing. There are actually a couple of videos online where you see one of them standing in front of a club, the street is crowded with people, and then out of nowhere, somebody comes flying, whoo, like with a kung fu jump, and he just grabs him and puts him on the ground as if nothing has happened. and you don't really see what's going on there. So many people standing around. And then the police come over, and it takes like three policemen to take control of over that person that he was just holding down in a lock comparatively easily. So that's this kind of guys who are they know their job, and it was great learning from them. So I really owe them big time.
Yeah, it's great having that kind of bullshit detector handy when you're training.
Yeah, absolutely. And they also introduced me to sparring, because from lesson 1, you had the opportunity to spar, and of course I would. So it was day 1, and at the end of the session they asked, do you want to... Oops, sorry, I just destroyed my phones. You can cut that out later. Okay, back again. Okay, so from day one, I had the opportunity to spar, and they would say, okay, so now we've introduced you to some basic concepts. Do you want to do some sparring? Here's a helmet. Here's a padded stick. Let's do it. And it's been a long time since I have seen sparks. At that point, the feeling. I think maybe the last time was in the playground when I fell off the... Oh, God, now I've lost the word. The Rutsche, it's this
slide.
The slide, okay. Yeah. So maybe ever since I fell off a slide in the playground, I haven't experienced these sparks, but I did that very first session. So they introduced me to sparring, and also how to view protective equipment, because we would do a lot of power hitting with sticks versus some old tires, and then of course we would need the mass so that we could hit somebody with force with a padded stick. They insisted on padded sticks. They said, because I asked, but I know a lot of Eskrima guys, they use rattan sticks and no padding. Yeah, that's because they cannot hit properly. If we hit you with a rattan stick, you fall over and unconsciously. So they were quite convinced about what they were doing. And of course, when people actually put it into practice on a regular basis, you don't question them.
Yeah, sure.
This is also something which I tell people.
I don't necessarily agree with their padded sticks idea, but in that situation, you just go along with it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to make a point that I was introduced to the benefits of protective equipment.
Yep.
But also the flaws, because when there is no danger of actually being injured, if there is no present threat, then you act differently. You take risks. And that's why I think it's a really good idea whenever you go to a martial arts school, if there are a number of fight simulations. So the paradox of all martial arts training is that you are training something which you cannot really apply in training.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's also my distinction. That's the difference between combat sports and a martial art. In combat sports, you train the thing which you can use in the competition exactly in that manner, one-to-one, while in martial arts, that's different. And so when later I was doing historical swordsmanship, then of course that was an even more imminent question, because swordsmanship is about using sharp implements, namely swords.
Hell yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that people forget a lot. I mean, you have all these geeks talking about swordsmanship, and then when you ask around, hardly anybody has ever held a sharp sword. I mean, the proportion of people training complex, sophisticated sword technique, not even having picked up a sharp sword ever, is quite astounding. It's not to diminish anybody's training efforts. It's just something you should think about.
But it takes a particular training environment and quite a lot of money to get decent sharp swords that you're willing to actually put against each other. And so what I do for that is I introduce students one-on-one, sharp on sharp, and it's entirely voluntary, so students don't ever have to do it. But yeah, I think it's critically important that is available, because it does change everything. Once you've done that,
absolutely
it
agree.
Everything.
And I would also like to say that it's not important to do it these days, because you don't have to learn how to properly use a sword in a true fight. So if you are happy with running through the woods like I did for many years with blunt swords, then that's good. If you enjoy competition with blunted steel swords and loads of protection, if this is what gives you your kicks, then go for it. Absolutely okay. But I've always been interested in how did they do it? How did they actually use the sharp swords, right? So I have never, ever really been interested in competition, or not even the communities that go with it. I mean, you do need people to talk to, and it's most enjoyable. And I met so many wonderful people over the years. But the reason why I started was just my geeky interest in swords and swordsmanship. That's it. And that's my driving factor. That's what keeps me going even today. And I've come down many paths and many streets that I have never even dreamt of.
So, what are your main research interests at the moment?
Right now, I'm in the process of writing an extensive article which follows up a lecture which I held last year at an academic conference at Castle Coburg. And I'm particularly proud of that one, because for the first time ever, I was invited by one of my heroes, that is Alfred Geibig. He's like the Heward Oakeshott of the Viking sword. So everybody who does Viking swords knows the Geibig typology of swords. Of course, people also know the Patterson typology. I know there are some geeks listening, so I'm aware of Patterson. But Geibig's typology is even more sophisticated, and so I have read his works long time, decades ago. And last year, he called me up. I had already made his acquaintance earlier on, and he called me up and said, "Roland, I'm retiring next year, and I'm retiring this year, and I want to organize a final conference, and the topics will be everything that I love. So it's going to be guns, swords, and reenactment." Yeah, you can choose. I want you to hold a lecture. You can choose the topics, up to you. Choose a subject, and it would be really, really wonderful if you came. Nobody can apply for holding a lecture. I'm only inviting selected people. Oh, wow. Yeah, so that made me really feel very, very proud, because it's like a circle. It's like things going full circle.
Sure.
Yeah. So I had this romantic interest in Viking swords, in the Vikings in general. I ended up doing swordsmanship, historical swordsmanship, for decades. And because I wanted to understand the fighting, I also did a lot of research into the material culture. So I looked at original artifacts. So I go out to collections on a regular basis, documenting the original swords. And then I made a couple of really interesting observations that thus far has completely escaped the attention of any researchers. And this is what I held the lecture about, and that's ergonomic design of early medieval swords, which I find super interesting.
Well, okay, and I'm sure the listeners will too. So tell us about the ergonomics of early swords.
Okay, so I guess a lot of the people who are listening to this show have probably seen some of the videos and the material I put out about the twisted pommels. So it seems that while the aesthetics of the medieval sword and the early medieval sword is harmonic, symmetrical design, because symmetry is actually not the best choice for ergonomics. Just look at any given knife in your kitchen, because the gripping hand is anything but symmetrical.
Right.
It seems like they tweaked the ideal of symmetry in subtle ways to better accommodate the gripping hand. So the swords. Pardon?
Such as, like.
Such as. Okay. So if you extend the sword forward, like going to long point, making the blade an extension of your lower arm. And then with pretty much every sword that has a disc pommel, the lumbar of muscle below your thumb, at the base of the thumb, will press the pommel away from the hand, while the smaller fingers, the pinky and the ring finger, will pull it towards the palm, right? And this results in a very subtle twist.
Yeah.
So if the pommel is aligned with the blade and the crossguard, so if they're basically parallel in one plane, then the whole sword will turn. So you would have to make up. You would have to make up for that with a slight twist of your wrist. But that is against. That's against the idea of martial arts to begin with, which wants to use your body to its optimum. So so you want your blade, you want your edges to be aligned with the ulna to have a perfect cutting plane. And a simple way to allow for that is that the sword maker twists the pommel to begin with. So if the pommel is already twisted, then it does not change the alignment of the blade anymore. And that's super fascinating.
Absolutely.
It's a means of manipulating swords or customizing them in a sense that seems to not only apply to early medieval sword, but also to high and late medieval swords. So any one-handed sword that you look at seems to have that feature. Maybe save for some pear-shaped pommels, but all the disc pommels, they are slightly twisted.
Slightly offset.
They're slightly offset.
So you could probably tell whether it was for a right-hander or a left-hander.
That's absolutely correct, and that's super fascinating, isn't it?
I did not know that. That's one of the reasons I started this podcast, is because I get to have geeky conversations where I learn a whole ton of stuff. Okay.
No, this is what made me think in the first place, because it's just a nuance. We're talking 2 to a max of 7 degrees.
Right.
So there are probably a lot of swords where you could say, well, maybe this is just because it's been in the ground for so long and we cannot really tell. Maybe there's deformation. Or you could say, hell, this is not much, so it doesn't really affect the sword that much. And this is just a kind of inaccuracy you could expect if it's a product of manual labor. And there are a couple of reasons why this does not hold true. First,
can I just say something?
You're a craftsman.
I'm a craftsman
yes.
of not a particularly good one, but I could do craftsman. Handwork can produce flawless results that machines fail to produce.
Absolutely.
Not all the time, but if you want something done perfectly, you don't run it through a machine. You get an artisan of the highest level to make it. So that argument about, well, okay, sure, there are some swords in the historical record that are made by, shall we say, apprentices. But there are also swords made by astonishingly accomplished masters of the craft. And if that pommel is on slightly off, it's because that person put it on slightly off for a good reason. No question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also, there are means to correct any mistakes. Like I've seen a couple of swords regardless whether these come from the early Middle Ages or the late Middle Ages, where you see little shims put into the cavity, the opening for the tang, where the tang enters the pommel.
Yep.
So that hole down there is oftentimes somewhat bigger, and then they put in little shims to put the tang exactly where it is supposed to be. So if you wanted a particular position, or if you wanted to correct any inaccuracy, you had the means.
Right.
And then statistics is the other thing. So if it was accidental, then you would have to expect a distribution of clockwise and counterclockwise twists of 2 to 7 degrees, 50-50, right? But that's not the case.
It depends. If the twist is an artifact of the way the pommel is put on, and most smiths are right-handed, then that twist will occur the same way for maybe 90% of the time.
But I'm talking about the any kind of deformation that may have happened. So
Sure.
statistically,
oh right, yeah. If it's after the fact, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so this is not the case. You have a distribution of about 80 to 20%, and so 80% is counterclockwise twist, which is the correct twist for a right-hander. While 20% is the opposite. Which pretty much matches the distribution of left-handers in professional sports too. Like somebody told me that I think there are like 10 to 15% of left-handers in the population.
I think it's 10%, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, 10. Yeah. Okay, so in some combat sports, you have a higher percentage of left-handers. Of course, we would need a much bigger database, and the lecture which I held was in part to even direct any attention of the academic world to the subject, which has been completely neglected so far. And it was great because they loved it. It was fantastic. There were people like Herbert Westphal, who has been researching and documenting bladed weapons for decades, and I have read so many of his books and articles. He would come up to me after and he's this distinguished elderly gentleman. He would come up to me after the lecture and said, "This was really, really exciting and interesting. Now I really understand why the grips are so short. Of course, you have to grip the pommel too. That makes so much sense." So it was wonderful. And then my friend Ingo, who's an archaeologist too, and one of my long-term training partners, said to me after the lectures, "This is what I really enjoy about the academic world versus the online discourse. Here, these are pros and experts, and nobody comes with stupid arguments and doubts anything.
Right.
They can tell if something is properly researched or not. And if it is properly researched, you get according
and if it's
recognition.
properly researched, they might disagree with you, but they don't just dismiss it.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And also, this is something which I hate about online discussion.
I don't do online discussion anymore. I just don't.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm running a couple of platforms, and I have certain ways to handle them. So if I run a platform like the Facebook Dimicato Facebook pages, or like my YouTube channel, I hate YouTube comment sections. They're the worst in the world. It's just I really hate it. Sorry, folks.
I shifted to Vimeo. I shifted to Vimeo because
I know
YouTube
for a number
is just a cesspool.
I'm considering that too. But then again, just recently I had this guy who joined my Patreon, and he wrote a message and said that I've been watching so many bad videos for ages. Only now I realized that I found your material and I really love it and it's fantastic. And I want to support your work. It's really, really great. So this guy would not have found the way to my work if it wasn't for crappy YouTube. But
then you have to moderate comments on.
Yeah, well, I mean, these days I just say you're welcome to leave a message because people just love to leave comments, but be aware that I only check them randomly. If you want to get in touch, send an email or send a note here.
Fair
and
enough.
here. And then in regards to discussions, every now and then there's something really interesting, and also by presenting, say, I do illustration a lot, and so if I present, because I'm a professional illustrator, so if I present, say, a reconstruction illustration of some 11th century harbor, and I present this online, then sometimes some people would say, yes, but this and this detail is actually not correct, or people will come up with ideas or point you to other places. And so it is helpful, but the discussions, of course, are sometimes a pain. And so these days, the way I handle it, and I only handle it because they're for the other readers, not for the troll, or for the know-it-all guy. Yeah, I handle it so that the other readers can see how I handle it. See? Okay. Yeah, because I feel obliged to do so, because this is what I look at when I go to somebody else's platform, which I hardly ever do. But if there are comments, I first check: does the author reply at all? And if he reply, whom does he reply to, and in which way does he handle any discussion?
Okay. It gives you a good insight into the person's character.
Exactly. And of course, any discussion about martial arts, if it is not face-to-face in a dojo, sword in hand, very, very quickly comes to a point where there's no constructive meaning to it anymore. Yeah. This is what I keep pointing out to people. I say, you can find me twice per year in Berlin. I mean, I have created an event which is solely about experimentation and free play. 48 hours, people are fencing from all over the world. I think it was Greg Melly who actually... Yeah?
It's just the Berlin Buckler Bouts.
That's the Berlin Buckler Bouts. Buckler Bouts.
Well, I'm just saying that so the listeners can actually find it.
Yeah, I can say a few words about the Berlin Buckler Bouts in a second. But I just tell people, come and find me. I have changed my opinion often enough, so I'm happy to reassess any of my current ideas. Sure. If you can convince me, sword in hand, come and find me. And that's usually a discussion stopper. Because then they either stop, or very, very rarely anybody ever comes. Of course, you would have to travel and so on. But it would be helpful if it wasn't so easy to leave your opinion everywhere, whether you have something to say or no. So anyway, Berlin Buckler Bouts. Yeah, I remember Greg Melly saying when I was at my first WMAW, that's the Western Martial Arts Workshop held in Racine in Wisconsin in the US every 2 years. Very nice event. So first time I was there, he said, the best things happen between classes.
That's right.
And that's right. And then I thought, why not make an event that is solely between classes?
That's a great idea.
So that's basically the Berlin Buckler Bouts. I was looking at what do I enjoy most when I'm not teaching or participating in a class, and that's usually free play and doing discussions that may ensue from the fighting. And so that's the Berlin Buckler Bouts. It's held biannually in Berlin, as the name says, and it was canceled for the first time due to the COVID-19 situation this May, but it's held every 6 months. And the basic idea was I wanted a regular check for my students, so that outside their class, outside the hierarchy that they had entered when they entered the school, because very rarely you see somebody actually jumping ahead of somebody who has been there for a longer duration. It happens, but not very often. So that they had a regular place to go to and test their mettle against somebody else from outside the club. That was the initial idea.
It's really important to have that opportunity.
Yeah.
Because you can get into a bubble in a club.
Absolutely.
And you get used to each other's mistakes and
Exactly. Yeah.
Great idea.
Yeah. For instance, okay.
Now you also research Viking sword and shield and spear and shield stuff. I only do research into systems that have written sources, like treatises like Fiore or 133 or Capoferro or whatever, right? So what's your approach to reconstructing these earlier styles for which we don't have proper written sources?
Yeah. Well, of course, we will never know how they actually fought. Yeah. Actually, we don't even know that, even if we have written records like the combat treatises. Mm-hmm. So we have to work from a couple of assumptions. Like, what do we have? We have swords. We know the weaponry. We have surviving artifacts. Yeah. So we can look at the artifacts. And this is something we should do even when we have written records. So then there's this concept of universality. Is that how you pronounce it? Sure. Stephen Perlman, who wrote the very recommendable book, the Book of Martial Power, called it universality, that you have underlying principles that rule everything in martial arts. Now, this sounds a bit like magic, but if you think about any human activity...
No, it's true.
Yeah, I know you know it. Any human activity is bound to the laws of nature. So that's physics and the anatomy of the human body. Yeah. Yep. So anything we do works under these parameters. And these, so martial arts, like any activity, is built on underlying principles, and these principles in turn are based on physics and anatomy. So if that was true, even thousand years ago, then they would have fought in a very similar way. And
although it depends on what determines victory in a fight is largely culturally determined. So
that's the other thing.
So exactly you have to know what victory condition they were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you supposed to cut the person's face off, or are you supposed to throw them on their back, or are you supposed to take their weapon away, or what are you supposed to do? What constitutes the ideal victory?
You're now jumping to something that I wanted to explain next. No, that's fine. That's fine, because that's exactly the most difficult bit about everything we do.
Yeah.
Even with the combat treatises, we hardly ever know the context. Yeah, so the actual context is super important. And even if we knew the context, then we're still looking at a very limited context, because it's 99% is single combat only.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and we do have a number of contexts even in the fight books, like fighting in armor, fighting with various weapons, fighting on horseback, but then it's only one-on-one. So what is really important to understand is that all violence, all combat always follows certain rules. Yeah, it's that there is no, despite universal martial arts principles, there's no universal martial art. That's quite interesting. And that is because violence never happens in a vacuum. So a martial art is always part of a given culture. So a society's ideas on violence, on their fighting men and women, on weapons, on warfare, is always reflected in that particular martial arts. Like codes of honor, religious ideas, socio-economical conditions, whatever. And these cultural aspects, they are the most difficult to research. Yeah? But to come back to your initial question, if ever I do a reconstruction, say I will run an experiment and I want to recreate blade damage on some Bronze Age swords. Yeah? So if I set up a particular dynamic combat excerpt, so to speak, so a little sequence, then this sequence has to be built on universal martial arts principles.
Absolutely.
Okay. The only exception that is allowed, so the only way that it could contradict universal martial arts principles is if I could explain that contradiction out of my research of the cultural context. Okay, that's the only exception. Of course, we will only. We will never exactly know if this is correct, but this is my approach. So, researching the cultural context is the most difficult part. Actually, efficiency in martial arts, that's pretty easy. A lock is a hand lock is a lock. A thrust in the face is a thrust in the face.
Angulating your sword behind somebody's shield. Yeah, it's just geometry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we know about the physics of the sword. We know how to move a sword efficiently. So that is,
Yeah.
you called it a labor-saving device at one point. I really
Yes.
love that term. Yeah. So if you know how to effortlessly use that implement, then you can get a much better idea of swordsmanship. Also, you understand why it has been such a popular weapon for such a long time. Because that's another thing that people have misconceive. Like, I remember in my reenactment days, people said, like, the spear, that's the Gatling gun of the Viking age. It's super efficient. I thought it was really funny, but then I thought, like, it's kind of strange that they were so obsessed with swords all the time. When the spear was so much greater than the sword, why would... It almost seems like in history, anybody who was able to pick up a sword, picked up a sword. And
I have theories.
Yeah. So, like, there's one really interesting experiment I ran at one point. We were talking about swords earlier on, and how it really helps to better understand swordsmanship. So there was this experiment that my friend Mikkel Mønsted, who's a really good spear fighter. He was using a blunt two-handed spear, and I was putting on a mask and some additional protection, and I had a sword and a buckler, a blunt sword. There's one 15th century depiction of that kind of match, this kind of setup. So we wanted to see how it actually works. So if you have a shorter weapon, you have to shorten range as quickly as possible, so you get into your killing zone, so to speak. While the other one, with a longer weapon, can take it easy and just retreats so that you impale yourself. So you have to make a charge. And 8 out of 10, he just poked me in the face. It was really easy. I mean, I would bind his sword, trying to keep it safe. While I entered, and he would just gently rotate out of it. Disengage, exactly. Also, a good spearman can change the length of the spear pretty easily by withdrawing it.
It's a really good weapon.
It's a great weapon. And but then we changed to then I traded my blunt for a sharp. So we did this.
That's very different, because you can actually bite his weapon.
Exactly. And what was more, I didn't have to look. I realized when I was using the sharp that earlier on, to get an idea what is happening in the bind, I had in my peripheral vision tried to take track of where the spear moved, because I couldn't sense it through the blade. Now I could focus on my target, and anything that happened in the bind just happened, and I felt, because I got all these tactile information, and disengaging was less easy for him, because there was no slippery sensation anymore. It was clear, crystal clear. Exactly. And crystal clear
bites into the wood.
Information coming from the bind, and and that completely reversed the outcome.
Really?
So it was like 3 to 7 or so, but almost reversed the outcome. And because the active fühlen, the active sensing, is only for me. A wooden pole doesn't have that. Okay, so this is something that so this is something that a sharp blade gives you. You can sense actively. You have a different means of controlling the bind and getting sensory, tactile information from it, and that is exclusively for the sword. So I think this is one of the reasons why the sword is so good. The other reason is a bit less appealing. Swords are really good at massacring and butchering a lot of people very quickly. If like in the late 8th century, in the Saxon Wars, Charlemagne ordered 4,000 Saxons put to death after a battle. And what do you pick up to do the job if you are part of the executional commando? A sword or a spear. So if you have to kill a lot of people, you use a bladed weapon. Just think that the latest, most ghastly example was in the 90s in Rwanda, where hundreds of thousands of people were put to death by the use of machetes. Yeah, exactly. So this is something else which we usually don't talk about when we think about
Yeah, it's not the glamorous
Swordsmanship.
bit of sword fighting.
It's not, certainly not, but if you really want to understand what the sword is all about, this is something you really have to face and you have to talk about. There are definitely more people who fell to the sword, who died by the sword, who were butchered rather than killed in a fair fight. Yeah.
Sure.
So that's the other thing why the sword was so super successful for so many centuries. Yeah, and that's something you have to face.
Okay. Well, I'm not quite sure how to follow that one up.
Well,
right.
how about talking about a pandemic?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Right. Yeah. So how is? I mean, I imagine you're locked down at home, and I imagine the clubs are shut in Germany. But so, not just how has Corona affected your training, but where do you see things going in the next 6 months or a year?
Well, personally for me, it was not much of a difference. Didn't change a lot because I'm working at home anyway. I'm living in a rural place in a nice house with a nice garden. And the one thing that changed was there was no more planes in the sky. So I can live with that. And because I usually don't leave this place other than driving to Hamburg for training once per week. You see, it's about 1.5 hours drive to Hamburg to go to training. So for the past, 10 years or so, I would drive to Hamburg once per week for a 4-hour session, and then the rest would be solo training, plus anything that happened during events. Yeah, so there would be like, maybe 10 weekends or so where I would be fighting all the time at some event or some class. So all classes were canceled this year, and no more driving to Hamburg. And what can I say? It kind of feels like a vacation from 25 years of playing with swords. And as much fun as it is, it's kind of nice to have some more time at my disposal to do other things. Anything from writing up finishing my lecture, finishing my article for that publication, or gardening, or or sharpening swords. I can do cutting tests here. In fact, actually, only 2 weeks ago, some of my sword friends came over, and we did have one fencing session. 2 days they stayed here, and we were like 8 people. So that was great. That was fantastic. It was also good to see that a couple of months not doing any sparring doesn't really affect your efficiency if you have
well, as long as you keep up your solo training, that's fine.
Yeah, of course, that's true. Yeah, so it didn't really affect me that much. In terms of the so-called HEMA community, I don't know, because I have to admit I don't really care for it that much.
Fair enough.
I mean, I've been part of that for a long time when I went to all the events. So I went to the usual development. You go to all the events you could go to. That was in the early 2000s when I had found out about history.
We first met at Swordfish, I
think. Absolutely.
Was it Gothenburg?
Right. In fact, it was the only one that was held at Malmö, wasn't it?
Malmö. That's the first one,
It was the first one. Yeah, exactly. I vividly remember it. I was really super excited because there was this famous guy Windsor, and I was, nobody knew about me, and I had some specific.
Well, I don't think that's true anymore, Roland.
Well, anyway, so that everybody knows, it was you who agreed to listen to my ideas for 45 minutes or so. I said, yeah, sure, I have some time. Tell me show me what you have to show, and then. I was really happy that you were quite impressed, even though I don't do anything like that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's 17 years ago, mate.
Yeah, that's right.
If we were still doing the same thing that we were doing 17 years ago,
that would be
then we haven't really been
wrong.
Well, we haven't been training, have we?
Yeah, that's right. These days you can say if somebody is doing some technique or some reconstruction or interpretation that you don't really agree with, you can say, "Oh God, this is so 2004."
Yeah. Okay. Now, I have a couple of standard questions I tend to finish up these interviews with. The first one is, what is the best idea you've never acted on?
It's probably the book that I have been working on for 10 years now, but then again, I'm still working on it. So it's the problem, in contrast to you, is that I do all the photography, the illustration, and it's a bit like a dough. You work it, it becomes bigger and bigger. So I've already cut it into 2 volumes. So it's supposed to be a book about about sword and shield. And the first volume will be about the time roughly from 800 to 1100. And ever since I started, I get so much more access to collections. So I have a worldwide network by now, and it's super cool that, like at that conference, there was this guy, a curator at a museum in Ingolstadt, the military museum. So have you ever been to the HMA museum in Ingolstadt? I said, I'm afraid not. Oh, you really have to come. We've got loads of Viking swords too. You have to come and look at all of them. I thought,
well, okay, if I have
to. So it's super cool. So I get more and more access to originals, but that also means that I find out more and more stuff. Like the ergonomics. Yeah.
But I have a suggestion for you.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, all right. The problem with this is, as with any research book, like literally, my last book, from medieval manuscripts to modern practice, literally a few weeks after it came out, Michael Chittister published the first ever collation of the Getty manuscript, which totally belongs in the book. And I'm like, if I just waited a month, I could have. Okay, so here's what I do to get the book out the door. Because until it's out in people's hands, it's useless. It's just, it doesn't even exist, right? You produce the first draft or whatever, and then the second draft, and that goes to an editor, and then that goes to beta readers, and the beta readers make comments, and then you make corrections, and you end up with something which is, to the reader it's intended for, it's a lot better than nothing, okay? And you're definitely doing them a favor by giving them the book, right? Okay, so then I conceive of publishing the book as distributing the book to the next round of beta readers. So the first edition of the book is just the next round of corrections. Okay, now if the book's done well, then there are no significant corrections for years and years, right?
Yeah, I see.
But I'm already working on a second edition of my theory and practice book because some of the reviews had some really good ideas for how it could be improved, right? But that doesn't mean I shouldn't have published it. It just means that until I publish it, I don't get that feedback, and so I can't make the book better. So I conceive of publishing the book as simply getting the next round of edits done.
Yeah, that perfectly makes sense, and in a way I understand that completely, and I address it somewhat differently because I am already putting out material. There are people already who have their swordsmiths twist the pommels of their swords. Shorten their reenactment sword scripts due to my research. So I am publishing, and I'm also putting out material.
So why can't you get the book out?
Because there's still a number of swords that I need to look at first, and a few more shields. So that's it.
Thing is, Roland. If thanks to me prodding you, you actually produce the book in a reasonable time, there's going to be a whole bunch of people who are going to be sending me thank you emails.
Right. Well, I'm doing my best. Because it's not only, as I said, writing. It's the research, it's the writing, but it's also all the illustrational work and the graphic design. And then I will probably publish as a crowdfunding project rather than going to an established publishing house.
Yeah, sure.
Because what does a publishing house do for you? They do the design, they
layout, marketing.
Exactly. I do all the marketing. I've been doing it for years. I have a long list of people.
You really don't need a publishing house.
Yeah. So so that's the idea. No, but I'm working on it. I stopped making any predictions when it's actually finished, but
that's a good plan.
it's getting. I'm getting closer and closer to it. So in a sense, it's an idea I've never acted on, as there is no book out yet. But
but you are working on it.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. I think when it does come out, you'll kick yourself for not having produced it years ago, and be already on the 3rd edition.
We will see.
And of course, if you need any help on the publishing side of things, like getting it into production, what have you, just
I will certainly pick you up on doing the corrections, the language, because I'm German,
sure.
so,
okay.
And the first edition will be in English, and
right.
There may be additional ones in other languages, but
okay. Well, standing by. Can't wait.
Excellent.
All right. My last question. Somebody gives you £1 million, euros, some other currency, to improve historical martial arts worldwide. What would you do with that money?
I don't know if $1 million would actually suffice, but I would put up a decent training center with halls, much like a theme park, with halls that are appropriate. Like, so if you are doing your 15th century longsword training, you do it in a proper training hall that is a reconstruction of
God, time. I want to come.
There would be like a Viking longhouse kind of thing. There would be anything you need to accommodate people. So there would be apartments, and depending on where I would put up that training center, it could be, for instance, located right next to the history park Bernau. So you could, if you wanted, stay there in period kit and live in the period for a while.
So have a kind of living history aspect.
Exactly. But you could also just rent an apartment with your friends and take it easy and and have a shower when you want one, and a beer in the evening. And so it would be this huge center, and of course there's no limits. You could have all the best instructors in the world, and ideally they would actually live there. Yeah. So, and there would be stables for the horses, so anybody who wants to do mounted combat, and then there would be shooting ranges, and the good thing about Bernau would also be there's a research center, archaeological research center, so you could cooperate with them and look at original weapons and things like that, and so it would also there would, in the long run, there would also be actual swordsmiths who would make swords on site, and so $1 million will not suffice, but it's a good start.
That's an absolutely brilliant idea. I love the idea of, if you're doing, 18th century small sword, you're in like an 18th century style enormous drawing room or ballroom or something to do your
and of course there would be decent training weapons for everybody, because that's always the problem whenever you...
How about period musicians?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a must. I mean, there are depictions of buckler fighters, and left and right there are musicians. And absolutely. No, I totally agree. Yeah. And so you can get the full experience after all, not just your regular black plastic outfit and trainers in a modern gym, a modern hall, but there you are wearing proper period shoes on a wooden floor.
Gear, that sounds marvelous.
Maybe that's the one good idea I never acted on.
Okay, dude, write the book. Let it do a Harry Potter on you.
Okay, good
right,
idea.
Or a Stephen King.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And then we do this.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today, Roland. It's been a great pleasure, as always. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Completely enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you again.
Thanks for listening. You can find the episode show notes at swordschool.com/podcast, where you will find transcriptions, photos, videos, and links for this episode. You can find a direct link to the show notes for this episode in the description. Join us next week for another cracking conversation. See you then.